our presenters today. So our presenters come from the Littleton Electric Light and Water Departments. Nick Lawler joined Littleton Electric Light and Water Department in 2001 as an electrical engineer, rising to the role of general manager in August of 2018. Reporting to a 5-member elected board of commissioners, he directs the department's strategic division, administration, and daily operations. He currently serves on the executive committee as a chair of the American Public Power Association, APPA board. Dave Ketchen is the assistant general manager at the Littleton Electric Light and Water Department. Dave joined the department in 2015 as the electrical engineer and was promoted to assistant general manager in 2018. Dave has an electrical engineering degree from Wentworth Institute of Technology and an MBA from the University of Massachusetts at Lowell. So Nick is going to take the presentation from here.
Great, thanks, Rebecca. Yeah, I really just want to thank the group for joining in on this, and it's a very important conversation. It's one that we've been talking about really since we've been allowed to, going back to this past September. Was the first time I spoke nationally about it at American Public Power Association Cyber Summit. And even at that time, this was almost a full year after the incident happened in Littleton. Only about half the people in the room were familiar with what Volt Typhoon was, which isn't overly shocking to me, but it's concerning that we aren't aware of really what our foreign adversaries and what these threat actors are attempting to do to utilities all across the country. And Dave will get in directly what happened in Littleton, but it's much bigger than what happened in Littleton. And when we were notified, there was one of 200 people, 200 systems organizations that were notified at the same time of this threat from Volt Typhoon and potential infiltration into our systems. We benefit being an electric light and water departments being combined. There's a lot of benefits to that. But one of the downsides is it kind of opens us up to, two utilities and being a target on either one. And as Dave will mention, I believe in his presentation, this was an attack on the electric system, not the water system at this time. But it very easily could have been an attack on either one or the other. It's been a very humbling and really opportunistic experience for us. I've been able to talk about this now for 8 months. I've had the opportunity to meet General Paul Nagasoni, who at the time was the NSA director. We've been exposed to a lot of great people that work for the federal government that helped us out. There's vulnerabilities that are what they call zero-day vulnerabilities, which mean that they're known vulnerabilities that you will not have the opportunity to mitigate against. So then it becomes into how do you rebuild after an attack. It's something that we all need to be aware of. And the partnerships that are necessary between us as utilities, federal agencies, private organizations is paramount in being able to thwart off these threats as they become more and more prevalent in the work that we do. So I'm going to turn it to Dave, and obviously I think that the more interactive this is, the more questions you have at the end, I think will be helpful for the group. So please don't shy away from any questions that you might have. Hi, Dave.
Thanks, Nick. Can everyone see my screen okay?
Looks good.
Awesome. Okay. So, yeah, like Nick said, this is a case study that we're trying to get out into the public now and see if we can help anyone along the way with lessons that we learned along the way. We've never been perfect. We're still not perfect. We're working to be perfect, but like Nick said, a zero-day vulnerability. There's not much you can do to plan for that other than hoping that you don't get hacked, really. So jumping right into it, like Nick said, our networks here were compromised by a Chinese state-funded attack called Volt Typhoon. So everything on the left here is sort of all the players that were involved. On our side, and then obviously the right is China. So basically, I guess I'll get into what our company kind of structure is. So we're probably pretty similar to a lot of people on this call. So we were founded in 1912. We serve electricity to Littleton and Boxborough, Massachusetts, and water to Littleton and soon to be Boxborough, Massachusetts. And we're just starting to really get our commercial wastewater plant off the ground as well. So our approximate customer accounts on the screen there, 8,000 electric, water about 3,500, and then about 100 wastewater connections incoming. So we're not large by any means. I think speaking from the electric side, I think in terms of customer count, we'd be considered like a medium-sized public utility. Obviously, we don't touch any of the private companies, and then on the water side, we probably fit in probably similar to a lot of people on this call as well. So that's sort of where we're at. We generally float around. We share a building, so we share as many resources as possible. Like Nick said, him and I oversee both electric, water, and wastewater operations. We have about 45 to 50 employees at any given time combined, and we share whatever resources we can. So that'll kind of be a theme of our department moving forward throughout this presentation. So moving on to what happened. So December 12th, way back in 2022, Fortinet, who we had Fortinet firewalls, they disclosed that there was a vulnerability with their current firmware. And as Nick said, it was 0 days. So they found out about it after, after a hacker had gained access to those firewalls at some point in time. Luckily, our firewalls hadn't been hacked up to that point. So as that was happening, we had a managed service provider helping basically architect, secure, actively manage our network infrastructure. And we completely relied on them for things like this, for vulnerable security patches, firmware upgrades, things like that. So Fortinet came out with this advisory to upgrade firmware on December 12th. We actually heard from our managed service provider the next day that this vulnerability was there, and that they were working on a plan to get firmware upgrades out to all of their customer base. Fast forward to January 10th, 2023, we found out that the threat actor had gained access to our network. And when I say found out, we found that out much after the fact. And the threat actor in this case was China. That was confirmed by the different parties involved. But they essentially gained access to our network by exploiting that known vulnerability in our perimeter FortiGate firewalls. They leveraged the credentials that they were able to compromise. They used VPN access, and then basically they were just persistent, and they were able to perform different reconnaissance of our network from that point forward until we found out that they were there, and we're able to take measures to mitigate things. But basically, from that January 10th date, we determined that the threat actor had access to our network at almost all security levels due to what turned out to be our managed service provider's lackluster architecture of our network. So fast forward again, January to November, the threat actor was using these tactics called living off the land. So that's why they were kind of undetectable to our managed service provider or any of our network infrastructure. So they would come on to our network, like the first day they basically got onto our file server, made a folder that was kind of buried deep somewhere that no one would see it, and they called it something ambiguous, and they were just testing out what permissions they could get away with, and what files they had access to. So they basically jump on our network quick, see what they had access to, and then leave. After that first day, it was a little more persistent that they started probably over the next 2 months that they were in and out of our network, seeing what they had access to. It was, you know, every few days they'd check in, see what they could get, take what files they had access to. And then there was a long stretch where basically they didn't do anything on our networks at all. So from, you know, maybe March to midsummer of that year, they completely left our networks alone. So it was completely undetectable. And they kept up with that pattern all the way from January until we found out about it. So come November 17th of 2023, the FBI contacted Nick and I and alerted us that, you know, Volt Typhoon was happening on our network. They actually got contacted by the Microsoft threat hunting team, who happened to see traffic coming from an IP, a public IP that was associated with our network. And they reached out to the FBI about it, and the FBI reached out to us about it and told us that, you know, this was a real cause for concern. And when I say the FBI reached out to us, they called us, you know, on a Friday afternoon when you'd least expect to hear from the FBI, and basically identified themselves, but they were still, based on all of our typical security phishing training, they were, it didn't seem like a real conversation that you would be having with a FBI agent at the time. So Nick and I did all of our homework, you know, contacting our local authorities, calling back to the local FBI office that we had received a call from. They even asked us to utilize to talk to them outside of our network, so that what they were saying makes sense, so that the threat actor wouldn't be able to detect that, you know, we were on to them being on our network. So they wanted to talk to us off of network, on personal emails. So we had personal emails going back and forth with us and the FBI. And eventually it got to a point where Nick and I were like, we need to make sure, you know, you guys are being genuine. This was all on one day. And we asked them to come in for a meeting that next Monday, not really knowing what to expect. I remember Nick actually told the local police chief here in Littleton that this was happening, just in case it's not the FBI that shows up. Can you guys kind of be around? So fast forward to the next Monday, two guys in black suits show up, just as you would think, asking for us to meet them in the conference room. And it ended up being the FBI and actually the CISA team, so the Cybersecurity Infrastructure Association with Homeland Security. They sort of partnered together. They showed us their credentials, and basically that's when we started to realize this was real. And as Nick said, they basically told us that the amount of time that they were on our network was very concerning, that in so many words that they wouldn't show up just to, you know, anyone's doorstep unless this was completely serious. And as the meeting kind of went on, we sort of had a sinking feeling in our stomach that this was pretty serious. If the FBI is here and they're telling us all these different things. So basically what the FBI wanted us to do was I'll go to the next slide. They wanted us to partner with CISA, so the Cybersecurity Infrastructure Security Agency, to take the lead on trying to mitigate whatever's been going on and partner with the FBI. So they sort of work under different branches. So they weren't sure how we would, I guess, respond to that request, because I guess a lot of private companies might not respond how you would think a public company would. But we obviously took all the help we could get as fast as we could. We decided to move forward with CISA. Nick was in constant contact with our local board here, sort of keeping them in the loop of what we were doing. And there was some paperwork back and forth, different NDAs and stuff like that we had to agree to with CISA, and basically what they wanted to do on our network. we had to agree to before they do it. So what they eventually want to do was install network monitors that would be undetectable and would be able to basically mirror our network, so they could get all of the network traffic that was coming onto our network and analyze it and see when this threat actor was coming on board and what they had access to. So we agreed to that. After that, we received basically a big hard case that came from FedEx that had the sensors inside of it that we were supposed to install on our network. So we went back and forth trying to do that with CISA. Once we finally got that up and running, this is all, within the next week. CISA had access to our network, and they actually wanted to come out and see what else on our network that they could see in person and get access to some more things that they wouldn't necessarily have access to without being here. So two CISA agents, one CISA agent, one was a contractor. They actually drove here overnight from Washington, D.C., again, telling Nick and I how important this was and how serious it was. They drove overnight from D.C., didn't sleep, showed up the next morning at our office, and basically we worked the entire day. They basically, combed through our entire network. They're asking different department heads, how do you guys operate? Like what's open here, what's open there? And from that, they took all of that information back to their office and were able to work with a team that they had going on, which probably had maybe 10 to 12 people on it, constantly, looking into our network, seeing how bad that this could be, how far they could go. And I'll go to the next slide here. So basically this is from CISM documentation here. So the threat actor here, this is basically how they could potentially get onto our network. So from this diagram, the threat actor exploits a vulnerability. Then they start basically trying to hack into different passwords. Well, when they hacked into our managed service provider's admin password, they figured out that admin password was essentially very similar throughout the entire network. So they almost had free reign throughout our entire network because of that. And CISA was able to figure that out very quickly, that, that was one of the leading things that we had to fix. Once they had that, they could, like I said, access the VPN to get onto our file server, take whatever files they wanted to take. And actually, as they were still living off the land, after we installed those sensors, China actually came onto our network 2 more times. And at that point, CISA, I'll go back to my timeline here. So at that point, between November 17th and December 15th, that's the entire time the sensor was on our network, and CISA was doing all their background work, trying to figure out where they could go. And eventually CISA came to the conclusion. At first, CISA wanted to keep that device as long as possible on our network to gain as much information as they could about the threat actor. So that was a little unnerving to Nick and I too. So it's like, we know there's a problem on our network, and they didn't want to immediately fix it for multiple reasons, but national security being the forefront reason there, trying to gain as much information as they could about these people that are trying to gain access to multiple different organizations across the country in multiple different sectors. So that was a little unnerving. And then finally, when CISA determined that, hey, these guys could potentially access some of your OT infrastructure, your operational infrastructure, if they really took the time to do it, that's when they said, okay, we got to stop this right now. And December 15th, we came up with a plan. CISA gave us, a list of 20 fixes that we had to make that day, between changes passwords, creating a better network structure, We added multi-factor to our VPN. There's just a list of things that we did on that day that should have cut the threat actor off at the head right there. So we did that, and then CISA left their monitors on for a few months afterwards, just to ensure that there was no more traffic from the threat actor, and there was not. And then as that time sort of progressed, we were able to make sort of the longer term more permanent fixes on our network there. So coming up with some challenges and whatever solutions that we figured out from this experience. So like I said, we used a managed service provider called Thrive Networks to manage our networks, and sort of how we got there. When I started back in 2015, and probably as long as Nick was in the department before then, we had IT personnel in office here, and they ended up creating a lot of problems just from the mere fact that they didn't really understand. I don't know if they didn't understand enough, or they couldn't see how the future of the electric or the water industry was going, with, you know, completely being air gapped and completely having separate networks from different things like our basically our admin network, or at the time our town network. So we're completely separate from town hall, but they created a fiber ring within our town that everyone connected to, and they essentially wanted to build a network infrastructure where everything from the town came through the light and water department, which doesn't make a lot of sense. And that ended up not working, obviously. And then so we ended up moving to this managed service provider for Thrive, and their main goal at the beginning was to, you know, untangle this network and get us in a better position that we could sustain ourselves, and not have to worry about managing the town's networks or anything outside of our operations. So once Thrive was tasked with that, things started out well with them, and they were working hand in hand with us. And then so I think as things progressed over the years, so that was back in 2016, over the years, fast forward to maybe 2019, 2020, 2021, they really started growing very fast. And I think this happens a lot with these MSPs. They start growing really fast, basically intaking different companies and promoting from within. So a lot of the people that we were working with at the beginning got promoted up, and we got new team members, and there was a lot lost in translation with managing our own network, utilizing them. And then there was also more, almost I would call it red tape associated with this growth. They changed ticketing systems, where, you know, we used to just be able to pick up the phone and call them whenever a problem occurred. I felt like we had a little more control over them, and now we had to put tickets in online, and they sometimes wouldn't get back to us for a few days. And then we had these longer term projects that we'd start trying to pick off, trying to improve our security. Like one of them that I mentioned, we were trying to add VPN to our firewalls, or basically VPN to our firewall access for years, from I'd say from 2018, 2019, up until the point that this happened, unfortunately. And just projects kept getting delayed. It's just hard to manage. So with that being said, I guess sort of a challenge with working with them was, hey, we need to wrap up a lot of these projects. We need to come up with a different solution other than you guys moving forward. So not only are we trying to get this threat actor off of our system, at the same time, we're also trying to get Thrive off of our system. And that they just the things that were exposed from using them in this, it was very clear that, you know, we had to go in a different direction than them. So Nick and I came up with another plan, and now we use a new person for that. He has his own company. It's a smaller company, but they were with us throughout this entire case as well, Evil Lab Solutions, and basically they've just been helping us move forward from then. Another challenge that we had here, a lot of employee personal information. We didn't have any customer personal information taken, but employee personal information was taken because they jump on to people's computers and take their stored passwords within their internet browser. So we had a few cases where I think maybe 10 or so employees' passwords were compromised, or they were taken at least. So we had to come up with a way for employees to change all their passwords. We're disallowing password storing within browsers now, and we are implementing a password manager. So we're implementing this password manager called Keeper, which some of you might be familiar with, but it's basically much more secure, much easier to use, and much harder to hack into and gather those passwords. So that was another sort of challenge that we faced. And then like I mentioned before, working with CISA offline was hard during the entire thing. They really didn't want us. They didn't want us to tip our hand, so they didn't even want us to Google search Volt Typhoon on our own company network. They wanted us to use our own personal emails, personal phone numbers, everything that we could do off the network to work with this, just to keep them completely in the dark and make the actual remedy to the situation worthwhile. So those were three of my major focal points there, and then a couple lessons learned here. So after CISA finally gave us the final report, basically said, you guys as of right now are good to go. They gave us a path forward of different short-term and long-term security things that we should start to implement. And one of those things, they recommended we partner with them so that they could perform a penetration test on our network, which we moved forward with right away. So they came back probably last summer, I think, Nick, and they had a team of 5 people who took 2 weeks. Essentially, 1 week was offsite, 1 week was on-site. They took 2 weeks, and they just tried to hack into our network. And once they either got to a point that they couldn't go any further, they'd ask us to help move them into the next segment of our network so they could see if they were to get in, what they'd have access to now. And they kept doing that. So the first week was remote. Second week, they were actually on site. They came, they brought, everyone had 2 or 3 monitors, and there was just a rat's nest of cords in our conference room as they tried to hack into our network and get into our SCADA systems and see if they actually could get places, which we actually did very well during that penetration test. They did give us some easy things to fix in that as well. So like I said, we're always trying to improve, but they were impressed during that penetration test of the roadblocks that were there from just a short while ago. And then we started getting these cyber reports from CISA as well that basically look at our public facing IPs and tell us what traffic is going back and forth on them, and if there's any known either gaps in our security or vulnerabilities that could be exposed. So we get those monthly, and then we actually work with MassDEP to get a grant recently where we're trying to bolster our operational technology assets and install new infrastructure on the water side, new switch infrastructure on the water side, so that we don't have shared switching at some of our shared locations where we have electric and water infrastructure. So we're trying to physically separate those out which might be over the top, but it from a operational standpoint here, it really makes sense as well. Basically, one of the other hard things along the way with this was, or a hard thing in general, having an electric and a water department, is when you do firmware upgrades, the upgrade impacts everyone, but it impacts operational equipment differently. So if we do a firmware upgrade on the electric side, we'll see a blip in our communications. But at one point on the water side, when our system was sort of temporarily changed, the configuration was a little different of how our water distribution system was working. If there was a comms loss, we actually lost. It would basically shut down 2 of our water treatment plants at the time, and that was a time when we were trying to figure out how to mitigate for PFAS, and we basically connected 2 plants together through a temporary water main that was above ground, which that lasted for 2.5 years. So that made things more difficult as well. But I would say that all in all, we came out pretty unscathed, and I think Nick has really done a great job of trying to highlight this as an opportunity to create conversations and try and help people move forward and grow, and just essentially learn from us. So that's sort of why we're here today, and I can't wait to see all the questions that there might be with everyone. So with that, I guess, I don't know, Nick, we want to open it up to questions, or if you have anything to add.
Yeah, I just want to touch on a couple of things you had said. And really, this is Littleton focused, but Nicole Perloff, she was a former New York Times reporter, cyber reporter, has done a podcast called To Catch a Thief. If anybody's interested in really the bigger impact of what the Chinese government's doing, I highly suggest that podcast. The living up the land technology and process is something new with these hacking attempts. There's no signals, there's no thumbs up behind. And that once they gained access, they acted like they were one of our employees. So they're really hard to detect. So just a takeaway for the group. I think we need to change our mindset when we think of the federal government. For some of those that are a little bit older, like myself on the call, you remember the Ronald Reagan quote, "I'm here from federal government. I'm from federal government here to help." It's like the worst thing you could hear. I don't think that's true anymore. I think the federal government really does want to help, and we have to rely on them. They have the expertise that we need to help combat these foreign adversaries. On the electric side, we've been dealing with this for a long time, and I think we're maybe a little bit further advanced than in the water industry as far as dealing with these type of events, because we've been under attack for a lot longer than the water industry has been. And you can go as recent as 2015, when Russia took out the electric grid in Ukraine. And the water industry is now just starting to see these type of attacks over the last probably 3 to 5 years. So, if you look at that Ukraine event, one of the biggest takeaways from that in 2015 was they used a lot of default passwords on their relays at the substations, and that's how the Russians were able to gain access. And unfortunately, I feel a lot of that is true today with water department, PLCs and some of the infrastructure they use. So, that's one thing that we've been very fortunate enough, again, having this tied resources. Our water folks are very well versed in what has happened on the electric side, and likewise the other way, because these foreign adversaries see us all utilities all as the same. We're providing critical life resources to the people that we serve, and they're just trying to cause disruption across critical infrastructure, no matter where it is. I think that is touching on the IT staff. Having your own internal IT staff was very, very difficult. Because this industry changes so quick. There's just so much going on. So that's why we moved to MSP. But you do need to make someone accountable for the MSP in your organization, and it's another big takeaway for us. Is we promoted an employee to a position, add to their duties that they're responsible on holding that MSP accountable. So that way you have your hands into what's going on, and not solely rely on your consultants to do that work. I think that's all I had. I don't know if you want to jump into questions now, Rebecca, if you want to ask them.
Yeah. Let me get this last one copied before I lose track of it. All right. Prior to this threat, has your department had any cybersecurity training? And if so, what type?
Yeah, I can take that one. We've been doing training for a long time in this area. Phishing training, all types of employee-based training, ransomware. We've done it through Know before, which is what's known, in that part of the industry. We've done it through the state most recently. We've gotten some state grants and we're part of the cyber training program. We've taken cybersecurity serious for a very long time, which is why it was a little shocking that we were hit. But then you start understanding, how it happened. It can happen to anybody, no matter how well trained you are and how prepared you are for it. If you have a 0-day vulnerability, it doesn't matter how trained you are. I don't know, Dave, if I missed some of the training pieces that we do.
No, Know before is the main one. And as Nick said, all of our employees did great, do great on the training, and they did great, at the time of this incident. So we were happy that wasn't the case.
Okay. I know you said you added MFA to VPN. Prior, was there also no lockout or tries limit, or was it time-based?
So we had almost a mixed MFA before this incident. So on all our OT networks, we had multi-factor authentication enabled. It was on our corporate networks that we didn't. And a lot of that was for reasons that you could imagine. Employees don't like it. It's a pain in the neck. So we were a little hesitant to roll it out. Areas that we didn't see as overly critical to roll it out on. But as this incident proves to you, any sort of access, opens up your OT network ability. So we have it everywhere now. There were lockouts on it before. I don't remember, Dave, if it was 3 bad attempts within a certain period that locked it out. I think is what it was.
Yeah.
But we didn't have a policy in place that employees had change passwords either. So now we have that I believe every 6 months you guys change your password. So a lot of employees had passwords that they had probably for decades.
Yeah, and the threat actor is extremely savvy at password hacking. If your network is set up to allow, if MFA is not in the equation, they can basically take whatever password hashes or whatever you want to call it offline, crack the password, and then it's like they've always had it.
All right. Was there an air gap between the electric network and the water network? Did you take steps to secure the water system while the attack was happening?
You want to tackle that one, Dave?
Yeah, sure. Yeah. So both of our networks are both air gapped, electric and water. How everything was set up now is that everything came in through the perimeter firewalls, and then sort of the firewalls segmented things from there. So that's how that was set up, I guess. What was the second part of that question?
I think it had to do with we mitigate the water side while we're under attack on the electric, and the answer is yes, yeah. Because in the beginning we didn't necessarily know where the impacts were, so we treated it as if we were fully under attack and every system was impacted. And as Dave mentioned, there was even connections back to the town of Littleton, so we had to make them aware of the event, and they had to go back and make sure that they were unimpacted by Volt Typhoon, which they weren't either. So in the beginning, we were very blind to where the issues were, so we treated it as if everybody was impacted.
Is there any reason, and can I call you the department because you have a very long name? Is there any reason the department was targeted, or are foreign actors trying to hack all utilities?
All. But like Dave mentioned, there was a known vulnerability on that firewall. These hackers are very good at knowing where these vulnerabilities are, and I believe they're very good at knowing who has what infrastructure in place, cyber infrastructure in place that are blocking them. So it's a very sophisticated group.
What were the steps the department took to authenticate or verify the initial call from the FBI, just to make sure that it wasn't a false or a fake call?
Yeah, and Dave kind of touched on that. So I don't remember exactly. I think Dave got the first call. He forwarded it to me, gave them my number. They then called me. And again, like Dave said, it was on a Friday, so we work a 4-day work week. So Fridays, but not in the office. Um, I didn't believe it, and it seemed like a scam to me at the time. It seemed like you get those calls about your Microsoft computer being out of date, and let's send you an email, click on this link, and update your operating system for you. That's what it sounded like. Hold on, it's the office phone. That I never believed. I didn't take it seriously at the time because it wasn't believable. I ended up hanging up the phone and I think Dave mentioned I called the local FBI office myself. I called the chief of police in Littleton. We also have a lot of connections with the Department of Energy. I called them to see what was going on. And at the end, we made them come into our office in person to visit us, to have a face-to-face meeting. They came that Monday. And even then, we didn't necessarily believe it. One of the gentlemen, the chief of cybersecurity for CISA, his name is Daniel King. Daniel King is a notorious spy, if you know your history. So I did, and I saw his card, and I'm thinking, did this guy just go to the department store to Macy's and grab and buy a suit and show up in my office, and he's the threat actor. So we really took probably the next 2 or 3 hours making phone calls to try to understand what was what. We had OT sensors on our network, so we'd already partnered with Dragos through a Department of Energy grant. So that was one of our phone calls, and they were unbelievably helpful through the event. The FBI did give us the 2 IP addresses that were compromised, so we gave that to Dragos, and they verified that there was some unusual traffic going on, and that's when we knew it was real.
Was it hard to get approval to share this with everyone, or was it a no-brainer? Because we find that for obvious reasons, sometimes folks are worried about sharing. And by the way, thank you for sharing.
Yeah, not with my board. My board historically has always been a very transparent board. They've always wanted to share our experiences, positive and negative. We do have an election in May, and we do have an individual running on this platform that we got caught flat-footed, and he's a cybersecurity expert. So it opens you up to those political issues. But board and our staff firmly believe that we won't take these seriously unless we humanize these events. And the only way to humanize them is to tell your story. And at the end of the day, and I think it was a James Comey quote from the FBI, there's 2 types of companies, one that's been hacked by the Chinese and one doesn't know that they've been hacked by the Chinese. So this is happening all over the place. It's going to happen in the future continually. And we need to do a better job telling our story and working with each other.
Agreed. How much did you inform employees about this event initially? And then what did that whole process look like?
I'll let you handle that. I don't remember, Dave. To tell you the truth.
Yeah, well, like Nick kind of just alluded to, when 2 guys from the FBI show up in suits and ask to see Nick and I, obviously the rumor mill starts right there. So we had to really kind of not slowly, but tell people as much as possible without scaring them overly right away. So we had a department head meeting. I think Nick probably the day after that or a couple of days after that, and sort of just kept everyone in the loop from there.
Yeah, once we allow the federal government on our system with sensors, there's a banner that pops up when you log in.
Right.
And you can imagine it's a whole paragraph of disclaimers. So all the employees get to see that when they log in. So there was a lot of communication going to the employees, but it was probably very vague what we were telling them at the time as far as the over impact of it.
What improvements did you make to your incident response plan after this?
Dave, you want to grab that one?
Yeah, I would say our incident response plan was actually pretty good as far as once an incident happens, who to call, who to reach out to. The problem was we just didn't know the incident was happening. So from that initial standpoint of who to call and what to do, not too much, but there is a lot to take away from everything that happened after that, as far as you know what we should be doing with backups and things of that sort. So it helped us open our eyes a little more to the whole situation.
You know, one thing that we haven't done yet is run our treatment plan in hand, which we're planning to do. Because really, if we're going to assume the fact that someday we're going to be a target and something's going to happen, then we need to be able to run our systems off of SCADA. And that's one thing that we're trying to wrap our arms around.
What degree was the SCADA system seen as a vulnerability?
Can you say that again? What was the question?
To what degree was the SCADA system seen as a vulnerability?
I'm not trying to understand it 100%. I'll try to answer it. So the only way you can attack critical infrastructure is through your OT network, right? So that's the only way you can do it is really through your SCADA systems, both electric and water. Like David mentioned, they never made it onto our OT network at that time, so they weren't able to get access. But I mean, that's what they're trying to do. They're trying to get on these SCADA networks. They're trying to take, they're trying to have the ability to wreak havoc in your community. And like I said, it was 200 organizations in New England that were notified as we were. They weren't all utilities. It was all different types of organizations. And there's really no events that happened. So a lot of the thoughts are that the Chinese government Volt Typhoon is just trying to get access for a time in the future. And who knows what it might be. We can all guess on what global event might spark a conflict between us and China that they would then want to roll out attacks on critical infrastructure. Now, they have a 100-year view of the world, so they're definitely in the long game of global politics.
Tell us how helpful MassDEP Drinking Water Program let me start that over. How helpful is the MassDEP Drinking Water Cyber Grant Program? Or how's the application process? Do you recommend this to other utilities?
Dave, you took the lead on that. Do you want to touch on that?
Yeah, absolutely. I would absolutely recommend that to other water systems. And I would recommend getting familiar with the application process now rather than right before you apply. We sort of, I guess getting lucky isn't the right term here, but we had all the required documentation for that grant because of this incident. So essentially, if I remember correctly, that grant application asked for any penetration tests you've done on your system, or if there's anything that you can point to that you've analyzed your system and where your vulnerability, where your needs are, and basically to prove what your plan is going forward. And you have to use that hand in hand with your application. So we readily had all of that available. So the process was really easy from our standpoint on that. And I would definitely recommend looking into that for all systems.
What was the financial impact to the department from this attack, excluding grants?
Do you remember that number, Dave?
Yeah, it really wasn't much, because we were sort of already in the process of replacing the firewalls that were hacked. So we already had budgeted money to replace those. It wasn't like we had to pay a ransom, so there was no cost there. And then since we separated ties with our old managed service provider, I don't think they charged us for their additional hours. So we had, some additional hours on our end. Our new managed service provider had some additional hours, but it was really not a lot of money.
And all the help that we got for CISA was free. So that was very helpful.
Can you say what was the entrance point after the firewall breach? Many times it's the Internet of Things, i.e. LA Schools was the PA system.
Do you want to grab that one, Dave?
Yeah. So yeah, they entered through the firewalls, and then they were able to access or leverage the VPN credentials. I would say that it wasn't any IoT device. It was directly related to the firewalls.
We're getting close to the end. I just want to make sure there are a couple more questions, but I wanted to make sure we do have a couple of poll questions that we want to get, and I didn't know if go front.